Alrighty, good afternoon for me, morning or evening for some people, but having some issues with my camera, so gonna be going camera free today. Uh, how's it going, John? If you want to submit an annotated game to me because you subscribe to me, I'll look at it on stream. We're gonna go over a game between Rod Weiss and Austin Shin today too, which is also on stream. So, yeah. So today we got setups. Feel free to ask any questions, and let's get started. So I guess the big thing, the first thing is, what is a setup? Well, it's pretty obvious, right? It's just when you set up something on your rack, you're making a setup. So that's pretty obvious, but I just want to get the definition down, right? So when we're considering making a setup, as opposed to a different play, there's a couple different things we have to do, and all six of these factors matter. So one is, how much does the setup play score, and then how much could you score doing something else. So when we do these two, we figure out how much of a sacrifice we have to make in order to make a setup. And then how much can you score if you get to use the setup? Well, right? Like if we're only setting up like a 30-point play, well, we can probably get 30 doing something else on our next turn without needing to set it up, so why would we bother? But if we can set up like a 70-point play, well, that's really good, right? How likely is it for your spot to stay open? If it's always going to get blocked, it might not be a good idea, right? Could your opponent use the setup spot themselves? If you're setting up like the case Z, well, they at least can't use it with the Z, right? But if you're setting up your S, well, your opponent could also use it for their S. And then, how big of a sacrifice does your opponent have to make to block your setup if they choose to block it? Well, this is part of the value in setting something up. If you force your opponent to block it, well, that's part of the value of the setup play, because you're forcing your opponent to score maybe 20 instead of 35 if they were just gonna make a play, and that's good for you. So there's gonna be a little bit of math involved, and then we're gonna go to the next slide and I'll show the math. So let's say we can make a 10-point play that's a setup, or a 30-point play that's sort of like the standard normal play. We'll score 60 if the setup stays open, and it will stay open 80% of the time. We will average 30 if the setup gets blocked, and it'll get blocked 20% of the time. And if our opponent blocks, they will make an average sacrifice of 10 points. We will average 35 if we make the 30-point play on our next turn. So if we do the math, if we go for the setup, we got this 10 from the play we made. And then 60 times 0.8 is our next turn, if we get to use the setup. And then 30 times 0.2 if we don't get to use the setup. And then 10 times 0.2 is the value that we get out of our opponent blocking if we force them to make a sacrifice. So if we add all of that up, we get 66. So that's going to be sort of the EV of how much we'll outscore our opponents by over the course of 2 turns. And yeah, just make intuitive estimates with those percentages. And there are some barometers, like if it seems like an obvious setup, then maybe it'll get blocked more often. An obvious setup generally if you can use your tiles if you can use the tiles you used for more points, that's a pretty obvious setup, because your opponent knows that you could have done that because they can see the tiles you played. So I would say, yeah, generally this. And I use this example because I want to show that the sacrifice that our opponent is making, if they block it, actually makes the difference. And a lot of people will fail to account for this, but if your opponent is making a sacrifice, then that is actually part of your EV. Part of the value in making the setup play is that you are sometimes going to force your opponent to make sacrifices, and that's a good thing for you. So we will probably on average outscore our opponent by 66. Sorry, we'll get 66 points of value if we go for the setup and 65 if we don't. So in this case, we'll go for the setup. Now I'm going to do another math example, and this one is a little bit wonky, but it showcases an interesting point. So in this case, we can make a 20-point setup play or a 34-point standard play. And if we make the 20-point setup play, we'll get an average of 50 points if the setup stays open, and it will stay open 0% of the time. Our opponent has to sacrifice an average of 15 points to block our play, which they will do 100% of the time. And we will get 30 if the setup is blocked or if we don't make the setup play. So let's I want to see somebody do the math in the comments, and I want to see what is the EV of making the setup play, and what is the EV of making the not setup play. So somebody do the math in the comments if you can. You see, is the exact same formula as poker EV? Well, sort of. Poker EV is like, let's say you're betting on the turn. Let's say you're bluffing on the turn. You might fold them out, and then you might fold them out on the river, and then your opponent's call on the turn would be part of your EV there, right? And then you might like hit a draw and then win the pot. And then you also get some EV out of the fact that you're more likely to get called if you have it, if you're willing to bluff. So I wouldn't say it's the exact same formula, no. So the formula is going to look like this. So it's going to be, I'll type it into the chat. Yeah, let's see. It looks, yeah, that looks right, Spades Colombo. Good job. So what we got in the chat, we got 20 for the 20-point setup play if we do that, plus 50 times 0, 50-point play times the 0 chance that it stays open, and then plus 15 times 1 plus 30, which is good. Not the best way of writing it. I'd prefer 15 plus 30 times 1, but that is the 15-point sacrifice our opponent will make to block it on average. And then the 30 points we'll get on our next turn, and that sums to 65. And then 34 for the standard play plus 30 for the next play is 64. So even though this play is guaranteed to get blocked, it's still worth it. And that's important. And situations like this will show up in the end game. I can actually I'll just pull up a position from an earlier. I'll try to pull up a position from an earlier um, stream. I think this might have even been like my second education stream, and it's a good example of making a setup that you know is going to get blocked because the threat of it is enough to scare your opponent. So let's see if we can find it. Let's see. Yeah, I got it. I got it. Okay. So I'll just open up. See if I can get Quackle open. Just hang on for a sec. But yeah. Shoot. Does everybody understand the math while I wait to get Quackle open? I want to make sure, because this will come up quite a bit, and it's important to get it right, because sometimes you have a setup and you shouldn't go for it, and sometimes you should, and it's just important to make sure. There we go. So this is a position from my second stream, and we're down 32. And our opponent's threatening to make some decent scoring plays, like Hillo and Pox, or Poxed up here, right? Our opponent could try this. They could try Hillo and Pox, or Expo, like something like this. So it definitely doesn't look very good, but we have the case S, so we're going to set up our S by making this play of oof. And then our opponent's best play is going to be to block our spot. And yet, that's enough to win, right? We're going to win. So, hello. Hi. Let's ban some people. It's hard for you to imagine how much you could possibly estimate. Okay, well, we'll go over an example. I can make up an example. I don't think it's like, I don't think you're going to get it exact during the game, but I don't think it's impossible. So yeah, but anyways, this is an example of we made a setup knowing it was going to get blocked, and that's because of the sacrifice our opponents made. Like, look, our opponent made a 13-point play instead of a 39-point play, and they kept the P when they could have played off the P, which in the end game, when you know your opponent's going to go out, if you play off the P, you get I will get 6 extra points as the 6 less points as the player going out. So that also is value. So they actually made what is effectively a 32-point sacrifice to block it, right? And then we actually managed to come out of it with a win. And yet, if they don't block it, we win by more, right? We win by 5 instead of 1. So we know our opponent's going to block it because it's the best play. We're going to assume our opponent's a good player for these examples. So we know they're going to block it, but we're still going to do it. Can Quackle calculate with setups? Not really. Quackle is going to be very bad at this. This time it worked because it was the end game, and Quackle can solve the end game because the end game is easy to solve. It's a complete information game. Complete information games are going to be relatively easy to solve, but not always going to work. Yeah, oof, exactly. So we know our opponent's going to block our spot to play oofs, and yet we're doing it anyways because it is the best play, because the threat of it is forcing our opponent to make a massive 32-point sacrifice, and we will be able to win. So that's a good example of making a setup. Even I think the way Macondo is going, it will be able to deal with setups. It's just that I don't think the makers of Quackle really realize this, but Scrabble is a game of ranges. And when they run the sim, your opponent's play is not assuming anything about your range. Like, it's the sim, your opponent is just making an equity play. But Scrabble is a game of ranges, and so it's important to consider that the range that comes up after a setup. So I guess we'll just try to do a quick example of making a sacrifice. So I do not know, but let's just pretend that this play of Mad kept the Z, and therefore it is a setup for ads, right? And actually, we'll make the play had, so it's a little harder to block, because UH doesn't take any hooks. But so we will pretend that had is a Z setup, right? We've decided that had is worth it over Hamza because it's a setup. So we're going to play had. And now let's just look at a couple of different racks our opponent could have. So let's say they have something like, I don't know, something like this. Well, in this case, they're going to play there anyways. So they're not sacrificing, and they're blocking the spot, right? Okay. In this case, there's no way in hell they're going to block it. So this is going to just live completely outside the realm of blocking it. We're not even going to think about it because we're thinking about the racks where they're actually going to make a sacrifice and block it. So not something like this. Well, okay. Now let's look at something like this. Well, now our opponent could play lip, or they could play fap, right? And it looks like, according to equity, lip is going to be 17 points, and fap is 8, but it's better to look at the equity, and lip has 29.1 points of equity, and fap has 24.1. So in this case, we're going to think of fap, if our opponent elects to do that, as a 5-point sacrifice. And basically, your job is to think about how many racks look like this versus racks that look like this, where your opponent is just going to use the spot anyways without sacrificing. And if we're going to calculate the opponent's sacrifice if they block, I think in this case it's pretty unlikely, because this area is probably pretty juicy. But I think in this case your spot is maybe, I would estimate it's 50-50 to get blocked, and then maybe your opponent's average sacrifice if they block it is something like 1 point. If they're thinking that had might be a Z setup. And another thing is you could play had and keep all kinds of stuff not setting up the Z. Like, it could just be the best play. So I would estimate that in this case it's going to be a pretty small sacrifice in order to block the Z. Does that make sense, Spades Colombo? Because most of the time, if they make a play blocking that spot, it's not even going to be a sacrifice because it's going to be the best play anyways. I mean, there's going to be all kinds of plays like, I don't know, pony down here where it's like that's just the best play. Don't even have to think about the Z. It's just that's the best play. And then there are going to be a few cases like this where it's worth a small sacrifice to block what's potentially a Z setup. What's your reasoning for? Well, our opponent can have all kinds of different racks. All right, I mean, if they have, you know, this, they're never going to block it. They have a 96-point play that doesn't block it, so they don't care about our Z play. So had doesn't because, right? I mean, aren't there all kinds of racks like? Is there any bingos here? I don't think there is, right? Like wouldn't you do had keeping this Todovsky? I mean, so it doesn't actually necessarily telegraph the Z. If it 100% telegraphed the Z, then their opponent would block more often, and therefore the big sacrifice, the sacrifice would be bigger. But 50% is just a guess by me. I think that sometimes they will make a play with two fuzz, and then sometimes they will make a play right here, right? Sometimes they'll exchange because this board is actually pretty closed, and then sometimes they'll play over here. And so, yeah, it's just a guess. It actually might be a little bit more than 50% of the time it gets blocked. I'm not sure. I mean, we can just generate some random racks. Like this time, Quackle says to exchange, which doesn't block it. But our opponent might want to play Sui and make a small sacrifice in order to block the Z if they think it's a setup. So maybe it's a little more likely. So maybe it's only 30% to stay open, and that's part of what you have to consider when you make a play like had. Does that make sense, everybody? Like if I were in this position with this rack, I would probably play Sui because it's a small sacrifice and had could easily be a Z setup. That's absolutely a factor, John. Yeah, I mean, if like let's say that I don't know. Let's say that I play the word homo here, and then well, that's a weird example because you would just play Jomo, but for those who don't know, homo takes a front Z. So let's say that let's see. Let's just say our opponent makes a play like this, and we're gonna play homo here, keeping the Z. So we have the Z on our rack, but we want to hit like an 80-point play here. So we're gonna play homo, and we're gonna keep the Z. Well, now at this point, there's actually our opponent has more options. Like if they have an A, they can play something with Oma, and they might play something like Mercy here. That's probably the best play with this rack, right? Him doesn't completely block it, right? So it would have to be something like this to completely block the Z. But if you look, like our opponent has all kinds of different places to play, and also homo only takes a Z. So yeah, no, I think there's more fives that start with Z, which is why I suggested playing homo on the bottom. Well, we're talking about setups, so we're gonna assume we're gonna try to play homo to set up our Z if that's what we're going for in this case. And then this will eventually lead into the example of a fake setup eventually, which is cool. So yeah, we're good. So I'm gonna briefly go back to the window capture and go back to my PowerPoint. And so this was the math which Spades Colombo did correctly. So great job. That is exactly the right mindset you need to have when talking about these setups. So good job. And then now we're going to look at it from our opponent's perspective just to confirm, like, if you see a play and you think it might be a setup, should you block it? So let's say we saw our opponent make a play and we think there's a 40% chance that it's a setup. So we could make a 35-point play that doesn't block it, or we could make a 20-point play that blocks it. And if we make the 35-point play, our opponent will average 75 points if it's a setup and 35 if it's not. If we make the 20-point play, our opponent will average 35 points just no matter what. Right? So if we don't block, our EV is this, which I did not show the equals, but it equals negative 16. Oh, what's going on? But it equals negative 16. And then if we block, our EV is going to be the 20-point play we make minus the 35-point play that our opponent's going to make, and that's negative 15. And so negative 15 is going to be bigger than negative 16. So in that case, we're going to go for the blocking play. And you might be wondering, I did kind of make all these numbers up, and you might be wondering how to estimate these during a game. Well, we can take a peek. So remember that game we created with just the word tufa and then had, right? So let's just look at this, right? Well, now we're the first player. We're the one that played tufa, and our opponent has just played had. And let's just do the math on all the different things about the setup. So if it's a setup and we don't block it, how much will they score with the Z? So I would say about 65 to 70, right? I mean, let's just make up some plays, right? Like zonk is 70, right? Zo is 73. ZE 64. Zany 69. So 65 to 70 or so. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for that. I messed up. So we'll go back. So we're back in Quackle, and we're just looking at the position with Tufa and Had on the board, and we are now the player that played Tufa, and our opponent has played Had, and we're trying to think, well, if it's a setup, how much are they going to score if they get the Z down, right? So I'd say about 65 to 70. Does that make sense? I mean, we can think about some plays that they might be able to make there, like ZE. Well, ZE is 64. Zone is 66. Zo is 73. And so, yeah, I would say maybe 67 is the average that they're going to score, though. Well, that's one. And then, how about the likelihood that it's a setup? So the way you estimate this is you try to just think of all kinds of different racks with the Z and all kinds of different racks without the Z that you think are a reasonable candidate to play Had, and that's your opponent's range. Because again, Scrabble is a game of ranges, right? It's just like any other incomplete information game, it's a game of ranges. So let's just think from our opponent's perspective. Well, they could have kept AERT. I think they would have played Had there. It's the best equity play. It seems decent, right? Well, maybe they did that. Okay. Maybe they kept AANT. Could they do anything else? Maybe they need to get rid of another A. Okay, they don't have that. They'll play Taha instead. Okay, well, maybe they kept AENT. Nope, because they would have played that. But then we can just keep thinking. Maybe they kept ANOT. Is that a reasonable choice? Dona, Taha, Had? Maybe, right? I mean, that's not that much worse. Maybe they didn't know Dona. So that might be something they could have. And then we're going to also consider all the racks with the Z, and we're just going to consider how likely each of them are, because of course there's only one Z, so a rack like this is going to be more likely than a rack with the Z, because it's a lot easier to draw the A than the Z. And that's sort of similar to maybe you're playing poker and you know you have like a blocker or something, or maybe it's like how in poker, you know, you're 3 times as likely, you know, just getting dealt the cards to have the offsuit version of a hand compared to the suited version, right? You can think of it that way. So we're gonna look, and we're just gonna try to come up with racks that have the Z, that where you might play had, and racks where you don't have the Z. And another good rule of thumb is oftentimes you'll keep duplicates if you play. So maybe they would play had here. It's pretty close to odd, right? Oftentimes it might suggest duplicates. So let's pick a rack like this. This seems perfectly reasonable to play had. So I would say that maybe they're only setting up the Z 20% of the time, because all of these racks where they're not, where they don't have a Z, well, there's a lot more combinations of those, because there's only one Z, but you know there's 4 Ds, there's 6 Ts, 6 Ns, right? So I would say maybe there's only a 20% chance they have the Z, because there's all these racks with a lot more combinations that don't have the Z. So if I'm in this perspective, well, now there's a 20% chance of stopping a play that's probably going to be an average of maybe 30 points more than something else they're doing. So maybe I should block if I'm gonna, so I'm gonna make a sacrifice if it's less than a 6-point sacrifice, because 20% times 30 is 6. Does that make sense, everybody? Can I get some love in the chat? So going back to that original rack of this, it seems perfectly reasonable to make the 1-point equity sacrifice to play Sui, and we can see if our opponent has the Z 100% of the time, because this is what happens when you specify partial opponent rack, then they are going to score an average of 20 to 24 more points. So they're going to score 24 more points if they always have the Z. So maybe if they have the Z 20% of the time, they're going to score maybe 4 points more or something. 5 points more. So maybe they'll score 5 points more after Sui than an exchange if they have the Z 20% of the time. Well, that's worth a 1-point sacrifice. And that's what it is. Sui is a 1-point sacrifice because it is a sacrifice of our equity and not the point. Because obviously points, it's better. It's 14 versus 0. But if you think of it in terms of our equity, Sui is going to be a 1-point sacrifice. Awesome, Spades Columbo. Thank you very much. If you have a game in either Woogles or Quackle or whatever, then you can send it to me and I will annotate it on stream. And right after this lesson on setups, we're going to actually, I'm going to go over one, so that's cool. So, all right, so the next topic is going to be on fake setups, and I just have a little bit of a poker example just to get you in the mindset of thinking in terms of like your entire range, right? So the example is just, why do we bluff in poker? And it's a simple question. I mean, everybody bluffs in poker, right? I think. And so I'm just gonna do the math that shows why you should. So let's say we always have a good hand when we bet, and we bet 100 chips into a 100 chip pot. 20% of the time we're going to pretend, well, that's the part of our range that's good enough to actually make this bet if we're only value betting. So 20% of the time we'll win the 100 chips because we bet and our opponent folds. And then 80% of the time we reach showdown. So now let's say that 2/3 of the time we have a good hand and 1/3 of the time we're bluffing. when we bet 100 chips into a 100 chip pot. Now if our opponent calls, we will win 200 chips 2/3 of the time, and we will lose 100 chips 1/3 of the time. And this averages out to winning 100 chips. And that's similar, you know, it's obviously similar. Like we win 100 chips this time, and we win 100 chips in the first example. But the difference is that we are betting more often if we're willing to bluff. And so we're doing the thing that wins us 100 chips on average 30% of the time instead of 20% of the time. And so so that's why you bluff in poker. And that's just thinking about it in terms of your range, because a lot of your bluffs are actually going to be a losing play in the short run, because they get some of their value out of the fact that if you're willing to bluff, you will be more likely to get called for the time that you have a good hand. And that's just like a fundamental principle in poker. And so we need to think in terms of our entire range when we're thinking about making setups. And that's why we have such a thing as a fake setup, right? So let's go back into Scrabble and we'll talk about fake setup. So a setup play will generally look suspicious, especially if using the tiles you did, you could have scored more somewhere else. I mean, they're generally not going to be high scoring plays. You're generally going to, they're sometimes even going to use a specific set of tiles that could be used better elsewhere. And so we want to sort of mask our setup sometimes. So well, let's look back at this game with Tufa, and let's pretend that I'm having trouble getting Quackle up again. Sorry, guys. I'm sorry. Okay. I don't know what to do. So let's just think about a time. No, I want to get Quackle open. I do not know what's going on. To open Quackle up again? Shoot. Quackle disappeared from my window capture. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Do we have Quackle now? We don't. That's weird. There we go. Okay. So now let's just go back to that game where the word Tufa was played. Now, let's say that the setup play that we chose to make was just... no, we gotta pick a better example. Let's say that the word Fila was on the board. And let's say that we make the play add. Let's say that we were keeping the Z, and we want to set up the Z. Well, if we play add here, it's only 10 points, and our opponent knows this because they know what tiles we put on the board. Well, they know we could also do this for 13. So immediately, alarm bells are going to be ringing in their head, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you playing it there when you could play it for 13? And since add, we know add takes a Z, they know add takes a Z, so they're going to think it's a setup. So if we want to ever be willing, like, let's just, you know, say our rack is something like, I don't know. I don't think there's any bingos here, right? So if we want to ever be able to get our Z setups paid off by our opponent ignoring them, we are going to have to make a play like add with a rack like this. And the cool thing about this is that, let's say our opponent has that rack, like this thing, right? Well, the best play according to equity is lip, which is 11, but it's 31 points of equity. And then let's say that they're scared and they play lad instead. That's a 6-point sacrifice of your opponent's equity. But we just don't. We only sacrifice 3 points to play add. So if we can change some of our opponent's racks where they have like a somewhat close decision and they go for a blocking play, that's part of our value that comes from playing add. And then the other part of our value comes from the fact that if we happen to have the Z and our opponent knows that we're willing to make a fake setup, they're going to be more likely to leave it alone. And so it goes back to that poker bluffing example. Basically, if we are always setting it up, they're almost always going to get blocked. And that's all right. We're provoking a sacrifice. That's a good thing. But if we mix in some fake setups, we're going to get to an equilibrium point where the average value is going to be just as much as the setup play, which is a good thing because setup plays have a lot of value because you're setting up a really big play, right? So we're going to get to the point where we are averaging that happening more often because we're willing to make the fake setups. And the fake setups might not have the highest valuation in the immediate sense. And that's okay because they're going to get some of their value out of the fact that you're willing to do that. And then if you happen to actually have the Z, you will get it less likely to be blocked. And that's part of the value out of being willing to make a fake setup. So it doesn't actually have to be like the biggest EV play in the immediate sense, as long as it gets some of its value out of these hypotheticals. And then there's the 5% chance they have the Z. I'd say it's probably a little less, because I think it's very unlikely they played Fila keeping the Z when they could play Zila. But yes, I do know what you're saying. That sucks. Does everybody get the math there? I want to see some comments. Yeah, good. And this is an important topic because I don't think a lot of people discuss this. Yeah. Okay, cool. And then the last, I think I got, okay, so the last thing is just, I called it setting up a tile you do not have. And this is similar in concept, but it's not a fake setup because in this case, we're actually hoping to draw it. And it's usually a desperation tactic that you use if you fall behind. If your opponent already has that tile, no, that sucks, but you were not very likely to win anyways. But if you draw the tile, maybe you can make something happen. Usually these desperation plays will literally just like put something in front of the triple like this and just like pray. It would be something like this. And usually we really don't care because we're that desperate. Like I know. I put QAT one from a triple in Quackle and was gonna show it. And the reason why we do this is because that's just we're desperate. Like we need to try something because we're behind. So that's just a little thing, you know, if you're behind in the end game or the pre-end game, maybe, even if you don't have a tile, you can try setting it up because you might, like, that might be your only way to win. Like, if you need the Z to win, just set up the Z even if you don't have it. It's okay because that might be your only way to win, right? So That's gonna be it for setups, but we're also gonna go over an annotated game for one of my subscribers, which is Rod Weiss. So Tactics 47. And hey Josh. We're going over an annotated game of one of my subscribers, and if anyone subscribes to me, I'll do this. So we got a couple of my subs in the chat. We got Jong Jin, Scrab, and we got Spades Colombo. And if you want to just send me a Twitch message with like a game you played that you want me to go over, I'm happy to do it. So we got a game between Rod Weiss, who is going first, and he's playing Austin Shin. And this was a couple months ago, but he said there were a couple things he felt he did wrong. He wanted me to go over it. So on his first turn, he goes for Aioli, and I personally believe that a play like Oil is going to be a tiny bit better. And the reason for this is the general philosophy behind opening short and opening long is that opening short is going to be a few points better. And the reason for that is because if you open long, your opponent gets to use double first. They get to use this double first. And they'll get to make a pretty nice parallel play a lot of the time first. They get first crack at the board that results from it, and you're going to open up a lot of stuff. What do you think, Josh? Do you think because Rod went for Aioli, which do you think Aioli is best? I think Oil is best. And then you could also play Lilo, which might be a little better. Okay. Well, I think I like Lilo the best actually. I'm not sure. It's either Lilo or Oil for me, but so the way the math works, right? If we assume that opening short is going to be 3 points better on average than opening long, Aioli has an equity value of 19.22, and Oil has 17.94. So that would help the case for Oil. And then there's also Lilo. I don't know. The good thing about playing Lilo is you setting up your own S in the double lane, which is nice. So if your opponent doesn't go over here, you get a guaranteed crack at it. Even though your opponent gets first crack, Lilo is definitely your style. Well, it doesn't matter what my style is. One of the plays is correct. Regardless of what my style is, like one of the plays is correct. But I think it's Lilo because the parallel plays are going to be pretty low scoring compared to Oil, where we slot the I, and we set up our own S in the double lane, which is nice. We don't set up a double lane for our opponent unless they have an S for hooking, but we have an S, so we're probably a favorite to hit this spot since we already have it. There's not this double lane. They can't use this double over here. So our opponent's not going to have a lot of great options in this case. Yeah, we only have our semi-subjective heuristics. Anyways, I think Lilo is best. I think it's probably a point better than Aioli or Iliol. So not a major mistake, but no. I mean, if you have like intelligent things to say, by all means, please. And this applies to anybody. If I'm missing something, I want the most accurate thing to come out. So if you think Aioli is best and you have like solid reasoning, then please. I don't want like fallacious reasoning like play style to come out, but if it's like factual, then please, by all means, I would love to hear it. So yeah, anyways, Rod went with Aioli, which is probably marginal. And we will move on. Austin goes for Yam, and then now we got this rack. There's really only one choice here, and Rod does it. And it's just QAT. Austin's going to exchange, and now Rod's got this rack. And if you don't know, he's got a couple different choices of bingos. We got Velites, which is sticky S, by the way. We got Levites. Then we got Leavist and Evilist. And Evilist doesn't play here. Leave security and relative defense. So, I think AIS probably has a. I would say that the 80th percentile of AIS is better than LS because you're more likely to bingo because you have 3 tiles that go towards a bingo. If that makes sense. And so the floor is going to be lower because you're more likely to have 5 or 6 vowels, but not the ceiling, but like the the 6th floors, like closer to the ceiling, you're going to see AIS perform a lot better because you got 3 tiles that go towards a bingo instead of 2. And I would say you probably shouldn't be floor phobic against somebody that's better than you. And Rod is playing Austin Shin, who's a very good player. So I think there's no need to be floor phobic in this case. If you're playing someone who's a lot worse than you, then you should be floor phobic because you're trying to avoid disaster scenarios. But in this case, I think there's no need to be floor phobic. But anyways, it looks like Levites is going to be the best play because it scores a lot more than anything else. Rod goes with, I believe it's Leavist, which I'm not a fan of. The big problem with this is that this is a very easy spot to use. We could even see like a 100-point Z play here. In this case, Austin gets a nice Y play, but I'm not sure if Rod didn't know Levites, but I think that there's nothing to be scared of with Levites because, yes, it's a triple-triple, but triple-triples are pretty unlikely, and it's a lot more likely that Austin's going to get just a nice like 40-50 point play off of Leavist. Right? I mean, just think about it. He could have an F. He could have a B. He could have an H. He could have an M. He could have a P. He could have a W. He could have the Z. He could have a Y. And that's a lot of tiles. There's a very good chance he has at least one of them, and he can get a good 4-letter word for 40 to 50. Do you think he's less likely? I should activate telestration. I'll do it for next time. I didn't even think about that. Or would it be relatively? I mean, Yam also might hint that he's keeping duplicates. And there's some chance, and there's also the chance that he could have drawn something. It's probably less likely than average, but I think it's still at least 75% that he has a 3 or 4 point tile, just based on. Oh, I'm sorry, exchange 3? Yeah, okay. So he could be keeping the H. That's a good tile to keep. He could be keeping the Z in some cases. But yeah, it is probably less likely. But I mean, I still think there's just such a good chance. And even if he doesn't, even if Austin doesn't, I mean, even a D play or something would be like 30 something. So in this case, I think Levites up here, which does open a triple-triple, which is not ideal. But I think Levites is going to be the best play because it scores so much more. I mean, it's 75 versus 67, so the 8 points is definitely going to be worth the slight risk. Okay, Velites is an interesting one because it makes triple-triples less likely, but it makes the sort of rank and file like plays through the triple, which are going to be a lot of Austin's range after this. It makes those, on average, at least like 9 points better, maybe less because it's harder to play through the V, but it's definitely going to beef up some of Austin's triple plays. So that's an interesting option. I think probably the 3 points makes Levites better. So I would go with Levites. Rod goes with Leavist, and we'll continue. Austin does Yeed. And now, this time, he's got a couple different bingos. I would not do this, even though it scores the best, because it slots the S in the triple lane. So Lardiest is just fine. And let's move on. So here Rod has got A, B, C, E, E, O, S, and he makes this play Celeb, which I do not like. The biggest problem with this play is that the leave is just not very good. In a situation like this where you're pretty close to a bingo but you don't have one, it's important to notice that you're probably going to have a lot of 25 to 30 point plays. And indeed, that's true in this case. And so when you're deciding between those, you're going to try to pick the one with the best leave. So in this case, he happens to have a double-double. So that's the best play. But if you didn't see that, then I would probably go for a play like this, which, if you notice, so 25, 24, those are similar scores. But ACES is a way better leave than AOS because it's more balanced. The E is better than the O. The C is a surprisingly good tile for trying to make a bingo, as long as you're not trying to hook, which you're not on this board. You're going for eights. So, and you get to have aces. Who doesn't like having aces, right? I love aces. So, for those reasons, Kobayas is the best. He might not have known that, but I think he probably knew all the words that came with this play of Obe. So, this is just a good way to remember to think about the leave you're keeping, because in this situation, you're generally going to have a lot of different plays that are going to score about the same. So we're gonna definitely be looking for the best leave we can, and in this case, that's going to be Obe. So Kobayas, yes, also Obe. Absi's not bad. The leave isn't ideal. I mean, ACES has pretty good synergy. There's also the fact that you're setting this up. That's not ideal. But no, I mean, Absi's not terrible. It blocks the Z. But I would probably do Obe. I have good tiles to hit both the Z hard, right? I mean, think about it. If you play Obe, you can actually hit the Z with something that starts with a C, and your opponent can't even play off of it. Or if your opponent plays something here after Obe, you could maybe even hit actually a pretty good play like Cages here or something. So I actually do really like Obe. So he goes for Celeb, and then Austin does Mod. And here Rod has a couple different choices. He goes with Axon, which is the equity play. But I'm not entirely convinced. But I think that Queen might be another good option. And the reason for Queen is because we're sitting on a closed board. So the relative value of the X is going to go up because closed board doesn't affect the number of good X plays you're going to get, because those are 2 3-letter words. Those aren't going anywhere on a closed board, but it is going to affect the number of bingos you can have. So down the line, when we play Axon, we're going to probably play the U off, and then we're going to have a nice bingo-y leave, but we're not going to have a lot of places to play bingos. So I actually think Queen might work out better because we're already drawing to a lot of things. Like, maybe we can hit something like Axe on our next turn, AXE here. Or maybe our opponent plays like somewhere here. If our opponent plays something like, I don't know, Hog here, well, then we could get like Oxes down, and that's a really nice score. I mean, that's better than the 35 from Axon. And it seems like the absolute minimum is we might be able to play XU, keeping a decent leave. We might be able to get something like Fox up here. And so I actually think Queen might work better. And this is a good example of relative leave value. I mean, the value of the X is going to go up on this closed board. And so if we have a play where we can keep the X, it's going to go up in value. And I also think it's nice that we're setting up a lane with an S that we have. I mean, it's not that likely Austin has an S with 3 out of 46 unseen S's and blanks. So yeah, I think Axon is not terrible. Queen is also not terrible. I'm not entirely sure which one is best, but I would probably do Queen. But Rod's gonna do Axon. Nothing wrong with that. It's definitely the equity play. So Rod does Axon, and then Austin does Fenny, and now Rod has CEESTUU. Not a lot of good options. He just does AQ. Actually, I don't know. I think probably. I think one interesting play that is worth considering. I'm not sure if this is best, but this score is 36, and it blocks the best bingo lane on the board, which at this point, like, you're up 52, you take a 36-point lead. Sorry, you increase your lead by 36, so you're up to an 88-point lead, and this D is the only bingo lane on the board now. So I know it's not ideal to keep UU, but yeah, I mean, you have a bailout. You have all kinds of bailouts. You're blocking the biggest lane on the board, so now your opponent can't use that, and you're gonna be up 88 after this play. So I actually think I think in this case it's important to look at the exact score. Like if Rod was behind 50 points, then there is no way in hell I would make this play. But I would just play a coup to set up a bingo lane. But since Rod is ahead at this point, it's good to be a little bit defensive. Yeah, turnover because both blanks unseen. That's a good idea. And I'm glad you added the qualifier because turnover is not just always a good thing. It's only a good thing if the unseen tile pool is good. So I'm glad you added that qualifier, or else I would have been mad. Seats plus exchange probably comes close to outscoring fishing UE plus random move anyway. Yeah, that's probably pretty close to true. And also, exchange is the floor of seats. There is no reason why we have to exchange on our next turn. We can already play Utu for 6, keeping a random leave. Maybe we'll draw the J and the O and make like a 40-point play up here. I don't know. We might be able to. So you don't just think of it as seats plus an exchange. You think of it as seats plus the average score of our next play, which might be as much as 10 or 15 points because we don't always have to exchange after playing seats. So in this case, I believe that seats is the best play because it does what you want to do when you're ahead, which is block the best bingo lane. So we're not going to go with an equity play of a coup, and then we're going to continue. So Austin goes for Huffer, which is a vacuum cleaner, I think. Rod goes with Routers on the triple. I think Retours is probably a tiny bit better because it doesn't take a hook, but it's a small difference. Rod goes for Routers, and Austin gets lucky, draws triple of orreries, and he plays it. And now Rod's got this rack, and it's kind of an ugly situation. I think it's important to note in this situation that he's probably a little bit more desperate than a lot of people think he is. And the reason for that is because he's behind. He's going to be effectively behind a tempo after he makes his play. The score is going to be almost even, but he's going to be behind a tempo, and that's a big deal, especially when your opponent seemingly has more high point tiles in their range because you don't have any. Compared to what you know you have, your opponent has very few high point tiles. Your opponent has very many high point tiles. So they're going to be able to they're going to be able to run you over. Maybe they can get a J play here. Maybe they can get an H play. I mean, even that would be like 30 points, and that's just going to be hard to come back from. So I actually think Rod has to go into bingo mode right away because he's actually pretty desperate here, even though he's only behind 20. And that's an important skill to realize. You have to realize your like relative win chance. Like he's not far behind in this spot, but he's actually really desperate because he really just needs to go for a bingo now because Austin can just, given what's in the unseen tile pool, it's very likely Austin can get a lot of 30, 40-point plays off. And you're not going to be able to do that. So yeah, and I think I don't mind Daunt because it keeps 2 vowels, but the I, we're keeping an I, and there's 3 G's and 3 N's unseen. And those are the best friends of the I, sort of. So I think probably I would go with Daunt or Dot. But I just think it's important to notice that we are actually desperate, even though we're only behind 20. Even though if we play Daunt, the score is even, we're not doing so well. So Rod does Fad. Which I'm not a huge fan of because there are no E's left to try to hit this D. So we probably should just play off more tiles in the hope of the blank or go for some sort of setup. And that doesn't accomplish either of those. So yeah, Austin Shen goes for Gong, and here we got AABINTU. And Rod, I like this play of Buat, and the reason for that is because if you look at the unseen tile pool, it's actually pretty unlikely that Austin can hit this spot. He needs either the eye or the blank, and I guess that's decently likely, but it's probably about as good as it's going to get in terms of praying for something. I mean, there's 17 tiles unseen. You have to hope your opponent doesn't have 2 of them. That's pretty decent odds compared to your odds of doing anything else. Because, again, we're kind of desperate here. So, you know what? If our opponent hits jiving, God bless them. Enjoy the W. But we just got to go for it. And this is a perfect example of this thing. Remember our old friend? It's awesome because it came up. Yeah. Oh, oboe. Yeah, there's some chance they hit oboe, but if they hit oboe, we might still be able to have a lane for 7s. It's also possible Austin has all consonants, which is unlikely. But again, we're desperate. We're going for unlikely things. You are right, though, Josh. We can still win after jiving? How the hell? Jiving's like over 100 points. Is it? It's like 90-something. I guess if it empties the bag and we somehow draw bingo, but jiving would use the blank. I don't know. You might be right. But yeah, anyways, this is a good example of setting up a tile we don't have. I mean, I guess we don't have anything, but we're setting up the J, hopefully, maybe the V or the W or the H, but we just got to go for something. So we're going to, I think Buat to set up a lane is going to be the best option. Again, Ba, it's pretty close, but we're actually desperate because Austin's going to have a lot of different plays like Joe, Jogs, Jow, and that's all in his range. And so we're just never going to be able to pull anything off down 2 without the tempo, and then Austin's going to go make a 40-point play. So I think we got to just go for Buat, pray to Jesus, and oh shit. Well, we tried, right? That would have gone down after Buat as well. So yeah, in this case, Austin happened to have Alporn, so we were not gonna win this game at this point. But I do still think Buat gives us the best chance because it is an example of setting up a tile that you do not have. I did not set this up this way. It just happened. I'm really glad. We do have to live for the variance, and variance goes both ways. I made like $1,000 with flush over flush last night. I know. And yeah, I guess I'm not sure if he didn't know walk or just missed it, but it might have been time pressure. He goes with wait. Austin plays Pongo and Junk and Vagai. So yeah, interesting game. Couple of cool positions. Given that the triple seemed like a big turning point, how much consideration should there have been into blocking it? In this case, absolutely zero, because Austin opens it. We have a bingo. All right. Oh, you're saying reroutes instead? Yeah. I mean, in this case, zero, because reroutes is a 19-point sacrifice, and we're only up by 80 after this, so we're up 1 bingo. And just think of it this way: there's going to be a lot more situations after retours where Austin gets his own 80-point bingo down, and we're going to be up by 20 with a tempo. That's really good. And then there are going to be some situations after reroutes where Austin gets his 80-point bingo down. Now the score is even. And marginally, that's going to matter a lot more than those couple of situations where he triples. And that's an important concept. Sometimes people are really scared of triple. If Rod was up like, I don't know, 70 points before he made his play, then it's going to be a lot more reasonable to play reroutes, because after a play like Routers and SH, a triple is going to be the only way he can lose, and that's also going to be true if he played reroute. So let's just pretend that Rod had 291 points here instead of 241. Well, in that case, a play like reroutes is going to be a lot more reasonable, because the only way to lose after that is a triple, and so we're going to block the triple. But in this case, it's just too close to worry about that. We just have to take the points, go for it, and then, oh shit. Oh well. So yeah, does that answer your question? I think it's a great game. There's a lot of interesting situations. I'm glad we had some positive discussions about various plays. There's some interesting ones. Aioli. We had Axon. We had Aku, which I think is cool because that is a good example of when to make a massive equity sacrifice, because Aku was a, let's see, 18 versus, so that's an 8-point equity sacrifice if Rod plays Cetes, Cetes, versus the equity play of Ur. So that's an 8-point equity sacrifice, and yet I think Cetes is a much better play. So that's really cool. So Spades Colombo and Jong, if you want to send me an annotated game so we can do one of these, that'd be really cool, because that's one of the perks of being a subscriber to me. But yeah, a really interesting game. A lot of cool positions. So thanks, Rod, for submitting this specific game. We had Aioli. We had Celeb. We had this play of Ab. We had Fad. We had Axon. And then AQ. And I think there was an interesting discussion surrounding all those plays. So yeah, thank you so much, Rod, for submitting this. I hope you learned something when you end up watching this, and thanks for subscribing. And I'm gonna head out and have a nice evening, everyone. But yeah.